The sun rose over the battered walls of Belgrade on July 21st, 1456. Smoke filled the air, the scent of fire and blood mixing as 40,000 Ottoman warriors prepared for a final, crushing assault. Inside the city, defenders stood shoulder to shoulder, hungry, wounded, and exhausted. A few hundred knights, a ragtag army of peasants, and a 69-year-old Franciscan monk were all that stood between Sultan Mehmed II and complete domination of Europe. By all logic, Belgrade should have fallen. The Ottomans had the numbers, the weapons, and the experience. The defenders had nothing but determination. Yet what happened next would go down as one of history's greatest military upsets. The year was 1456, and the Ottoman Empire was an unstoppable force. Just 3 years earlier, Constantinople had fallen after centuries of failed attempts. The mighty Theodosian walls, once considered unbreakable, had crumbled under the relentless assault of Mehmed II's massive cannons. Now, the Sultan turned his gaze westward, his next target, the Kingdom of Hungary. Hungary's most important defensive stronghold was Belgrade, a fortress city that stood at the edge of Christian Europe. If Mehmed took it, there would be nothing left to stop him from pushing deeper into the continent. His army was one of the most advanced in the world. His elite janissaries, trained from childhood, were masters of firearm warfare. His cavalry, the feared Sipahi, struck with lightning speed. And his artillery corps, led by expert engineers, wielded cannons so massive that their thunderous blasts could be heard for miles. Europe trembled. But while kings and nobles hesitated, one man prepared to make a stand: John Hunyadi. John Hunyadi was no ordinary commander. A veteran of countless battles against the Ottomans, he had spent his life perfecting the art of guerrilla warfare. He had learned that raw courage and brilliant tactics could defeat even the mightiest armies. But this time, he was badly outmatched. Belgrade's official garrison was just 7,000 strong, a pitiful number against Mehmed's 40,000. Desperate for reinforcements, Hunyadi turned to the people. Enter John of Capistrano, a 69-year-old Franciscan friar. He had no military experience, yet his sermons could move mountains. Traveling across the countryside, he called on ordinary men to take up arms. Farmers, fishermen, and blacksmiths came in droves, armed with little more than faith and pitchforks. Together, these two men forged an army from nothing. The odds were impossible, but they had no choice but to fight. On July 4th, the first cannonball struck Belgrade's walls. Ottoman siege engineers, masters of destruction, positioned their mighty bombards and began a relentless bombardment. Stones the size of cartwheels shattered towers and collapsed entire sections of the fortress. Inside, panic spread. The walls would not hold for long. Supplies were dwindling. Reinforcements were not coming. Yet, Hunyadi did not give in to despair. He refused to play by the Ottoman rules of siege warfare. Instead of sitting behind the walls and waiting to be crushed, he launched nightly raids. Under the cover of darkness, small groups of defenders slipped past enemy lines, setting fire to Ottoman siege engines and assassinating key officers. The Sultan was furious. This was not how sieges were supposed to work. And then, something incredible happened. Belgrade's greatest weakness was its lack of supplies. The Ottomans controlled the Danube River, cutting off any reinforcements or food shipments. If that blockade wasn't broken, the city would starve. Hunyadi saw an opportunity. On July 14th, Capistrano led an armada of makeshift boats, tiny fishing vessels, merchant ships, and rafts packed with volunteers. Against them stood the mighty Ottoman fleet, 60 war galleys armed with cannons and manned by experienced sailors. The result was a miracle. Capistrano's forces moved fast, too small to be easy targets. The Ottomans struggled to adjust, and in the chaos, Christian fire ships crashed into their vessels, setting them ablaze. Within hours, the once invincible fleet was in shambles. The blockade was broken. Belgrade was no longer cut off. The defenders had food, weapons, and reinforcements. The tide was turning. The impossible had happened. Belgrade had held. The Ottomans had suffered their first major defeat, and Europe had been saved. John Hunyadi, the architect of this victory, would not live to see the full impact of his success. Just weeks later, he fell ill and died. His final words to his son were simple: "Defend what we have saved." Sultan Mehmed, humiliated, never attacked Belgrade again. The psychological blow was enormous. The myth of Ottoman invincibility had been shattered. Europe, once paralyzed by fear, found new hope. But beyond the battlefield, the Battle of Belgrade had even greater significance. It changed military history. It proved that strategy, determination, and sheer willpower could overcome overwhelming numbers. And perhaps most importantly, it showed that sometimes, when all seems lost, the impossible can become reality.